All right, welcome guys back to LaFlamme Throwers, and we have got a special guest, James Rapien, on with us. He is the SI beat writer for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's been on sports radio in Cincinnati for years. He was up in Cleveland for a while, migrated, I think, as a secret agent across enemy lines, and spent about a year and a half up in Cleveland, gained all that intelligence to bring it back to Cincinnati. Joining me tonight, we have Steve North, Michael LaFlamme, a.k.a. The Frog, and of course, as I mentioned before, James Rapien. James, I just want to get us started off. Tell us a little bit about how you got into sports writing and ended up where you're at right now.
Oh man. Well, when I realized in about, I think it was about the 7th grade, I realized I wasn't going to be a pro basketball player. I wanted to stay around sports and do what I could to be in sports. And I think that's when I started to kind of explore different avenues and different ways to still be around the game after whenever I stopped playing. And I played through high school, multiple different sports and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say probably junior year of high school, I knew, all right, I want to go into journalism or communications and go that route. And then it's kind of just been one of those things where I've tried to be as versatile as possible in this business. Being willing to talk on camera, being willing to be capable at least of hosting radio shows and doing things like that, being able to write as well. And so I'm open to whatever, moving forward, but I think that's kind of the basis. I've always wanted to be around sports. I get asked a lot, well, what do you want to do? What's your ultimate goal? And I just want to be around sports and I want to cover them and I want to talk about them. And so if that's with the written word or if that's on a radio show or a podcast or whatever it is, that's what I want to do. So I think it's been, over a decade now of, I'm 28. So over a decade now of knowing that and putting all things towards it. And there's been a lot of interesting paths and twists and turns along the way, but I'm certainly excited to be covering the Bengals now for again after like you said the time in Cleveland.
So the evolution of media has just been a whirlwind in the last decade. I would say that's been something that you've been witnessed firsthand. I mean, we do not have traditional print media in its standard form. How do you adapt to that?
I think versatility is the first thing. I mean, you really have to be willing. And I know one of the big things that SI was looking at, and it paid off for me. They were looking at videos. And I remember back in 2016 was my first year going to the Bengals locker room on a regular basis and covering the team for 700 WLW and ESPN 1530. And I did these stand-ups with my cell phone. And it was for 15 people maybe on YouTube, right? No one was really watching it on Twitter because I would post it at like noon on a game day and people are getting ready for the game and stuff like that. But it got me more comfortable on camera. And that was my goal, is to be as comfortable as I could, take as much from the writers around me. And so now when hopefully we go to Paul Brown Stadium this year, and I'm hoping that that's the case, with a season, I think I'll be comfortable. So I think versatility and being willing to try a bunch of different things is extremely important. And in this business, we all have unique paths. When you get to a point where you're covering a team, I think that's just the reality of it. I worked in insurance sales, property and casualty from my 18. I was 18 to 23, and it helped me get through college. I worked at a hospital, Christ Hospital in Cincinnati, for almost 4 years. So you got to do these other things and these other ways to supplement, because I didn't want to go to Montana and be a host for 10 people and move from my now wife and do all that. I didn't want to do that. So I wanted to try to make it in a pretty decent market in my hometown. And so far, so good. Fingers crossed that it continues. But the evolution of me, I think the key to it is just being versatile, being able to do video, being able to write, being able to do a little bit of everything well. And then you focus on specializing one of those things. Whereas in the past it is, oh, he's a writer, or, she's good on camera. No, you got to be good at all of it. And I think that's what most outlets look for these days.
James, I want to jump in because somewhat similar paths, you and I. So when I realized it, like in high school, like, hey, I can't continue playing. I'm going to go towards the coaching and then end up transferring over to the scouting route. And for all the time and the hustle that you put in over I mean, you're still like, you're very young, which is awesome to hear about all your experiences. The question I just want to more or less propose, is there anything that you find yourself in like a true fan moment where you're like, wow, I do this for a living, but here I am as a fan?
There's been a couple of times, not recently. I really try to leave that side away. So when I do have an opinion, it comes from an unbiased perspective. But I will say the first time I met Chad Johnson, which was, it might have been 2016. It was either 2016 or 2017. It was the 50th anniversary. It was when they were bringing all the legends back to Paul Brown Stadium. And I grew up the biggest Chad fan, right? I have an autograph in the bookcase behind that you could see. That you can't see the autograph, but it's back there. But yeah, he's my favorite player ever, outside of maybe Tom Brady, but certainly favorite Bengals player ever. So that was one of those moments. And I think like a Brady, I think that would be a moment like that. But no, I haven't. Like I'll say that the first time, it was my first game in Cleveland, my first Cavs game, and covering the Cavaliers. And I got to be in the same shoot around as Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. And I love watching Steph Curry, but I did not have that fan moment. So there's been a couple of times, but it hasn't been too bad. I try to leave that aside, but there are times when you just can't. You have to fanboy a little bit.
So how was it like living in the Paris of the Midwest, Cleveland, Ohio, and how awesome the sports fans are and the culture of that city and everything that's amazing about Cleveland?
I love Cleveland. I love Cleveland. I think Cleveland's a great city, and I'll maintain that. And it's so funny when you see the national perception of Cleveland versus what it really is, and the wife and I live downtown. So we got to experience 4th Street and the Flats and Ohio City and Lakewood. And you got to go to all these different areas. And those are just a few, but had great restaurants, great bars, great places to sit on a patio and eat and stuff like that. And so we enjoy Cleveland a lot, and I'll never say a bad word about the city of Cleveland. And I think now that I've been there, it's one of those must-do road trips for Bengals fans because it's such an easy drive. It's a drive I've made a ton, and there's a ton to do around the stadium within a couple blocks or a half-mile walk. You can do anything you want, from walk along the river there and go to breweries to go to 4th Street. So I think it's a destination, and it should be a destination for Bengals fans during the Battle of Ohio on that Thursday night, by the way, prime time this year. So that should be a good one.
So James, I would have to agree. And being a Bengals fan from birth, I grew up for all intents and purposes, just a little over an hour south of Cleveland, right? So I love Northern Ohio. All my friends were Browns fans, which is why I think this bitter rivalry was instilled more so with most Bengals fans. But I'll take it a step further and say that for all the hype and fear you hear about the dog pound, I went to 3 Bengals-Browns games and sat in the dog pound in my Bengals jersey. And it was the most calm, docile environment I'd ever been in. And, I was expecting, I know that in the 80s and early 90s, there are stories about how rough that was and how rowdy. I've got to say that Cleveland fans in the dog pound were probably more polite to me than any other stadium I've ever been to. And that was a pleasant surprise. But I do want to ask you, how would you compare and contrast the two fan bases? And maybe they're very similar. But, Cleveland, Cincinnati's always been known as a baseball town just because the Reds were the first original franchise. But obviously, as I imagine you agree with by living here, it's always been a crazy intense football town as well, right? Especially when the Bengals are. How would you describe the fan base in Cleveland and how they're split between the Browns, Indians, and Cavs? And how would you compare the passion of Browns fans to Bengals fans? How are they different, if at all?
Oh, it's a Browns town in Cleveland. I mean, it's very, and I'm the guy who covered the Indians and the Cavaliers for the fans. So it was, there were times where I was like, hey, fans care more about the Browns, and that's just the reality of it, especially with the hype that went into that 2019 season. So yeah, I think they're an extremely passionate fan base, a fan base that is desperate for a winner. And the Bengals, Bengals fans have been that way at times. Desperate for a winner and diehard, but at the same time, there are a couple differences. And one is, I look at the Haslams, and while they're not considered great owners, they're not unwilling to spend money. And there's this perception around Mike Brown about his unwillingness to spend money. So there's a distinct difference there. When the teams struggle, well, the Haslams, they're just dysfunctional. Well, Mike Brown doesn't want to spend money. He runs it like a business. And that's two separate criticisms. So I think that's one of the things that stand out. But overall, I would say this. I think both fan bases want a winner extremely bad. I think Bengals fans, and rightfully so, this isn't a criticism, become apathetic quicker, or have become apathetic at times because of that. Because it's like, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if the perception is that Mike Brown doesn't want to win or isn't willing to do everything he can to win, then why should I care as much? And I think that especially those that have lived through the 90s and then went through the 2000s and obviously what has happened over the past 4 years, 4 straight losing seasons, I would say that's the case. Now, the Browns, they've dealt with a hell of a lot of losing, but the fans are as loyal as can be as well. So I think there's a couple differences, but both extremely passionate fan bases. And honestly, guys, and I'm not doing this to please both sides here, I would much rather the Browns and Bengals be good like they were in the 80s than have to deal with the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger and the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. So that's just the reality of it here. Hopefully the 2020s are different.
James, you bring up a great point in the talent level of the AFC North. Is it the most talented division in football?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the best division in football. I think the Bengals are, from a talent standpoint, underrated, and they could win 4 to 6 games this year. And that's not my prediction, but they could win that many and be much more talented than that. They're young, but they added a bunch of quality players. And they should be projected to be the 4th team in this division. The Ravens, they're probably the best team in football. I know they're the only team favored in all 16 games this year. So that tells you that the betting community feels good about Baltimore. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they might be the 3rd team, honestly. From a talent perspective, I certainly think they are. But they do get Ben Roethlisberger back. They haven't finished below 500 during Mike Tomlin's career. So to me, I think it is. I haven't mentioned the Browns. I think they have a top 5 to 8 talent, talented roster in the league. I mean, they're great. They're loaded, and outside of linebacker, I don't see really many needs or weaknesses. So it's an extremely talented division. I don't think any game is going to come easy, even though the Ravens are going to be favored in these matchups, or probably will be favored in them. They are now. I don't think it's going to be easier, a cakewalk for them in any of these 6 games. So it should be a fun season and a competitive season.